I still remember that day like it was branded into my memory. The taste of salt in the air, the sound of the waves crashing against the hull of a yacht that wasn't mine, and the sting of her words echoing through me like a slap I never saw coming. It was supposed to be a perfect day. Sunlight dancing on the water, laughter spilling from every corner of the deck, and me standing there in a simple white sundress, clutching a glass of orange juice, trying to pretend I belonged. But deep down, I already knew they never really accepted me. I was the outsider. The girl from a small apartment downtown. The one who couldn't tell the difference between a $10 bottle of wine and a $500 one. The one their gold and by Daniel had all fell for. And that was my first mistake. His mother, Caroline, never even tried to hide her disdain. She had that smile, sharp, polished, fake. The kind that made you feel like she was sizing you up just to find your weakest point. And when she found it, she never missed. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting that golden glow across the water, Caroline decided to make her point. Not quietly, not in private, but in front of everyone. I was standing near the edge of the yacht, watching Daniel joke with his friends, when I heard her voice behind me. Calm, cold, laced with venom, dressed as elegance. You know, dear, she said, sipping her champagne. There's something off about you being here. This isn't really your kind of crowd. I turned to face her, forcing a polite smile. I'm sorry, Mrs. Langford. I didn't mean to intrude. She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her lips curving in that familiar condescending grin. Oh, it's not that you're intruding, she said sweetly. It's just, this world isn't for everyone. The sea has a way of reminding people where they stand. The laughter around her was quiet but sharp, like invisible daggers cutting through my composure. And then came the moment that burned itself into me forever. Her hand waved casually toward one of the seats near the front of the yacht, large, cushioned, embroidered with their family crest. That's for family, she said. You might want to sit somewhere else. I felt my cheeks flush hot. The world seemed narrow. Daniel turned at that moment. Our eyes met, and I saw it. Hesitation, shame. But he said nothing. Nothing. He didn't defend me. Didn't even look at his mother. So I stepped back, smiled as best I could, and found a seat at the far end, near the engine noise, where the air smelled of fuel and soul. No one followed. No one cared. But as the yacht pulled away and the city skyline began to fade behind us, I made myself a silent promise, one I would never forget. One day, I'd have my own yacht. And when that day came, no one, not Caroline, not Daniel, not anyone, would ever tell me where I didn't belong again. Because I'd make sure I owned every inch of the world they tried to shut me out of. The day everything fell apart wasn't dramatic. Not at first. There were no shouting matches, no broken glass, no storm of emotions spilling across a room. It was quiet. To quiet. It was a Tuesday, one of those gray, ordinary mornings that somehow end up changing your life forever. I was standing in Daniel's apartment, making coffee, the same brand his mother once mocked me for drinking, when he came out of the bedroom with that look on his face, the one that said everything without a single word. Can we talk? He said softly, avoiding my eyes. That was all it took for my stomach to drop. I placed the mug down slowly. Sure. He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his perfect hair, the same hand that used to trace circles on my back when he said he loved me, and said it, I think. We're from different worlds, Anna. I almost laughed. It was the kind of line you hear in bad movies, not in your own life. But there it was, plain, cold, final, different worlds. I repeated, forcing the words out even as my throat burned. You mean your mother finally got to you? He flinched, just a tiny bit. But I saw it. She had. Daniel, just say it, I whispered. She told you to end it. She didn't have to, he said quickly. I just realized you deserve something simpler. And I cut him off. Something simpler. You mean poorer. He didn't deny it. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. I wanted to scream, to throw the coffee mug, to tell him how small he made me feel that day on the yacht. But instead, I just stood there, still, cold, and quiet, because deep down, I knew something he didn't. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his biggest regret. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. You know what, Daniel? You're right. We are from different worlds. But one day, I'll make sure you see mine. He opened his mouth to reply, but I was already walking to the door. I didn't cry, not until later, when I got home to my tiny apartment, sat on the edge of my bed, and realized that everything I thought my future was built on had crumbled in a single morning. I remember sitting there, staring at the cracks on the ceiling, and whispering to myself, "You don't get to break me, not forever." The pain was unbearable, but underneath it, there was something else growing, something new. It wasn't hate, it wasn't anger. It was hunger, a hunger to rise, to prove them wrong, to build something that couldn't be taken away with a few cruel words. That night, I pulled out my old notebook, the one I used to sketch design ideas in when I still believed dreams mattered. I looked at those sketches, handbags, jewelry, accessories, and for the first time in months, I smiled. It hit me right there. If I couldn't belong in their world, I'd build one of my own. I started small, selling custom leather bags online, designing at night, packaging orders before sunrise, working double shifts at a cafe just to keep the lights on. No one believed in me. But that didn't matter, because I believed in me. And every order I shipped, every thank you email I received, felt like one more brick in the foundation of the empire I was secretly building. They took my pride, my heart, my place on their yacht, but they gave me something far more powerful, a reason to rise. I stopped checking Daniel's social media. I stopped wondering what Caroline thought. All I cared about was one thing, that silent promise I made on that deck. One day, I'll have my own yacht. And when that day comes, they'll see me, not as the girl who didn't belong, but as the woman who built her own world. The funny thing about pain is that it can either destroy you or shape you. And for me, it became the sharpest tool I ever had. In the beginning, I was just trying to survive. Rent, bills, sleepless nights. My life wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet struggle. But inside, I was on fire. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn, make coffee in the same chip mug that used to sit in Daniel's kitchen, and remind myself, they think you're nothing. Prove them wrong. At first, no one cared about my designs. I posted photos online, but the world scrolled past. I got more silence than sales. But every no, every ignored message became fuel. One day, a woman from Paris, a complete stranger, but one of my bags, she posted a picture on Instagram, tagging my tiny brand page. I remember that moment like it was yesterday. My phone started buzzing nonstop. Comments, shares, orders. It was like watching a seed I'd planted in the dark finally crack open. That one post changed everything. People started calling my designs authentic, fresh, different. They loved that I wasn't a luxury brand. Not yet. I was real. And that became my secret weapon. I didn't have a marketing budget, but I had a story of heartbreak, ambition, and quiet revenge. I began sharing glimpses of my journey online. Not the sad parts, not the pain, but the fire that came after it. Photos of long nights sewing, videos of me delivering packages on foot through the rain. People connected to that. They didn't just buy the bags, they bought the story. And slowly, my tiny business grew into something bigger than I'd ever imagined. Within a year, I was invited to a local fashion expo. I didn't have fancy displays or expensive banners. I just had my work, clean, elegant, purposeful. When I walked into that hall, surrounded by designers wearing $1,000 suits, I felt out of place again, like that day on the yacht. But this time, I smiled, because I knew how it felt to be underestimated. By the end of that weekend, I had signed a distribution deal with a boutique in Milan. Me, the girl who wasn't good enough for Daniel's family, had her brand displayed in Italian storefronts, I remember coming home after that trip and sitting in my tiny apartment, crying tears of relief. Not because I'd made it yet, but because I'd finally seen proof that I could. That was the night I allowed myself to dream again. So I went bigger. New designs, new materials, new audience. I expanded into jewelry and accessories. Everything I once saw the rich women wearing at those yacht parties. But this time, I wasn't the outsider looking in. I was the creator, and my name was becoming known. 2 years later, I was invited to a high-end gala for entrepreneurs, a charity event held at the same marina where Daniel's family kept their yacht. The same pier, the same lights, the same sea breeze that once carried whispers about how I'd never fit in. I almost didn't go, but something deep inside me said, "You have to." So I did. I arrived in a silver dress. I designed myself. Elegant, timeless, powerful. Every step I took across the red carpet felt like reclaiming a piece of my past. Cameras flashed. People smiled. I felt that familiar mix of nerves and pride. And then I saw them. Daniel, Caroline, and his parents. They were standing near the yacht, laughing with a group of investors. For a second, I froze. My heart raced. My palms went cold. But then, I remembered who I'd become. I straightened my shoulders, smiled, and kept walking. And that's when Caroline saw me. Her laughter faded. Her eyes widened. She nudged Daniel, who turned, and for the first time in years, our eyes met. He looked different, older, tired, but mostly shocked. Because standing before him wasn't the girl he once left behind. It was the woman he never believed I could be. He started walking toward me, but I stopped him halfway with a calm, confident smile. "Anna?" he said softly. "Daniel," I replied. "It's been a while." He looked around awkwardly. "You look incredible." "Thank you," I said. "So does success." The words slipped out naturally, not cruel. Not bitter, just true. He tried to ask about my life, my work. I answered politely, keeping my tone professional. No anger, no tears, just grace. And in that silence between us, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, deep, unspoken regret. "Before I left," he said quietly, "you proved me wrong." I smiled. "I didn't do it to prove you wrong, Daniel. I did it to prove me right." Underscore that night, as I stood on the deck of a rented yacht, my yacht, watching the city lights dance on the water, I finally understood something. Revenge doesn't always look like payback. Sometimes it's peace. It's walking away with a calm heart and a full life. The girl who wasn't allowed to sit on someone else's yacht had built her own empire. And now, she was staring at herself. I still remembered that evening vividly. The salt in the air, the low hum of the harbor, the way the water shimmered under the moonlight like liquid silver. It wasn't just another night. It was the night everything came full circle. The gala was over, but the after party was where the real conversations happened, the kind that decided deals, partnerships, and reputations. And it just so happened to be hosted on their yacht, the same yacht where, years ago, I had once been told I didn't belong. When the invitation came earlier that week, I laughed at first. It had been sent to my brand's official business address, addressed to Ms. Anna Dellin, founder and CEO. Rel 8 Lear. I didn't think twice. I RSVP'd, not for revenge, not even to prove a point, but because I had earned my place there through every sleepless night, every rejection, every moment I spent rebuilding myself from nothing. So I arrived. The scene was almost poetic. Golden lights reflecting off the water, elegant people holding champagne flutes, the faint music of a live band drifting across the waves. Every detail reminded me of that night long ago, except this time, I wasn't the outsider. When I stepped onto the yacht, a few heads turned. People whispered my name. "That's her, the designer everyone's talking about." It was surreal. Hearing my name spoken in the same circles that once looked right past me, I moved gracefully, greeting guests, exchanging smiles. I wasn't nervous anymore. My confidence wasn't loud or forced. It was quiet, steady, real. And then, from across the deck, I saw them again. Daniel, his fiancée Caroline, and his parents. Caroline looked stunning, as always, dressed in something elegant and glittering. But when her eyes found mine, I noticed something new in them, a flicker of uncertainty. Daniel's mother gave a polite smile, the kind people give when they're unsure how to behave around someone they once underestimated. I could almost hear her words from years ago echoing in my head. People like you don't fit into families like ours. But here I was. One of the investors approached me, a tall man in a white linen suit. Anna, I've been meaning to meet you, he said. Your designs are revolutionary. My wife adores your collection. You must tell me how you built such a powerful brand in so little time. I smiled. By remembering every time someone told me I couldn't, he laughed, impressed. That's the kind of mindset I like to hear. And as we talked, I caught Daniel watching me, not with anger, not even jealousy, just quiet realization. At one point, the host announced that he wanted to toast to the future of innovation and resilience. And then, to my surprise, he gestured toward me. Tonight, he said, we celebrate not just business, but transformation. And no one embodies that better than Anna Dillon, a self-made woman who turned heartbreak into an empire. The applause that followed filled the air like waves crashing against the hull. I stood there, smiling, humbled, and in that moment, something inside me healed. Not because of their recognition, but because I no longer needed it. After the toast, Caroline approached me. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Anna, she said, I just wanted to say, congratulations. Truly, you've done incredibly well. Thank you. I replied kindly. I guess life has a funny way of proving where people really belong. She gave a tight smile. I suppose it does. And then Daniel came forward. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped aside, near the railing, the soft waves rocking gently beneath us. He sighed. You've changed. I had to, I said. You made sure of that. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I was just scared. My parents, their expectations. I looked at him, calm and unshaken. You don't have to explain, Daniel. You made your choice, and I made mine. He nodded slowly, looking down at the water. You look happy. I am, I said, smiling faintly, because I stopped needing anyone's approval to be enough. For a while, we just stood there in silence. To people who once shared a dream, now living in completely different worlds. Before I left, he said quietly, you know, when you walked away, I thought I'd won, but I was wrong. I turned toward him. You didn't lose me, Daniel. You just lost the version of me that believed you were worth the pain. And with that, I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to dot as I stepped off the yacht. The night breeze brushed against my skin like freedom itself. For the first time, the water didn't feel like a barrier between me and the life I wanted. It felt like reflection, like clarity. I took a deep breath, the air filled with salt and promise, and I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was whole. Success had given me independence. But peace, real peace, came from forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. The woman who once cried for acceptance had learned the power of walking alone, with dignity, purpose, and quiet strength. And as I looked back at the yacht glowing behind me, I smiled, because I knew, this time, I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in triumph. The same boat that once rejected me was now my stage, and I had delivered the performance of a lifetime. Sometimes, when I wake up before sunrise, I sit by the window of my penthouse overlooking the same city that once made me feel invisible, and I think back to how it all began, the pain, the humiliation, the night I stood outside that yacht, hearing laughter echo from a world that told me I wasn't good enough. Back then, it hurt. Now, it fuels me. People often ask me, Anna, what drives you? They expect me to say success, money, or fame. But the truth is, what drives me is remembrance. Remembrance of who I used to be. The girl with trembling hands and tear-stained cheeks who still chose to keep going. That's the part no one sees. The hours, the sacrifices, the nights I worked until dawn because failure simply wasn't an option. I didn't build an empire because I wanted to impress anyone. I built it because I refused to let pain be the final chapter of my story. After that yacht night, my business exploded. The media called me the designer who redefined modern elegance. Celebrities wore my gowns. Magazines featured my story. Investors lined up to be part of Rel. But success didn't come without its challenges. There were moments when I almost lost myself, when the noise, the attention, the endless expectations threatened to drown me again. One morning, my assistant rushed in and said, "Anna, there's a feature request from the Elite World magazine. They want to do a cover story. From rejection to royalty." I smiled softly. "Tell them yes, but make sure the message is about resilience, not revenge," because by then, I had realized revenge wasn't power. Transformation was. Revenge satisfies the moment, but transformation, that lasts a lifetime. Months later, I received a call that stopped me in my tracks. It was Daniel's mother. Her voice trembled, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Anna, I wanted to reach out personally. I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything for a moment. "I misjudged you," she continued. "When I told you that you didn't belong, I was blinded by our world, the one that values status over spirit. You proved me wrong, and I admire you for that." Her words didn't sting anymore. They simply existed, like echoes from a life I had long outgrown. I took a breath and replied gently, "Mrs. Wallace, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." She was silent for a moment, then said, "You're an extraordinary woman. Anna, I hope you find happiness." "I already have," I said, and I meant it. That summer, I launched a new project, a foundation for women with dreams, but no resources. We offered mentorships, startup funding, and community support. I named it the Phoenix Project because every woman who has ever been broken deserves to rise again, stronger, fiercer, and free. During the foundation's opening ceremony, I stood on the stage and looked out at a sea of hopeful faces, young designers, single mothers, entrepreneurs, dreamers. And I told them, sometimes the people who break you are the same ones who build you, not because they help, but because they force you to rise. The crowd went silent. Some nodded, others wiped their tears. And I realized that's what true success feels like. Not applause, not validation, but impact. A few months later, I found an old notebook buried in one of my drawers, the same one I used to sketch dresses in when I could barely afford fabric. Inside it was a letter I had written years ago, but never sent out. It said, "Dear Daniel, one day you'll see me again, not as the girl you left behind, but as the woman you wish you had believed in." I smiled reading it, not with bitterness, but with gratitude, because that letter wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, the promise I made to myself, and I had kept it. These days, I no longer chase recognition. My revenge, if you could call it that, is simple. I live well. I love deeply. I sleep peacefully. And every time I pass by the harbor, I see yachts lined up, shining in the sun. Some are bigger, fleshier, louder than the one that once made me feel small. But none of them make me feel the way mine does, like victory, like peace, like home. Because yes, I bought my own yacht, but it wasn't just about the luxury. It was about rewriting the memory. I stood on its deck the first day it arrived, barefoot, wind in my hair, and whispered to myself, "You did it. You built this from nothing, from pain, from heartbreak, from every no that was meant to break you." And for the first time, I realized revenge isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving yourself right. If there's one thing my journey taught me, it's this: don't chase people who reject you. Don't fight to sit at their table. Build your own. And when they see you shining, they'll wish they had treated you better. Because life always comes full circle, not to punish, but to reveal who you are, who they were, and who you were meant to become all along. And that, I think, is the sweetest revenge of all. It's strange how life turns, quietly, slowly, but completely. Years ago, I was that woman crying in a tiny apartment, wondering if dreams were only made for the privileged. Now, I walk through marble lobbies, boardrooms, and fashion weeks, yet I've never forgotten where it all began. They call me the woman who built an empire from heartbreak. But the truth is, I didn't build it from heartbreak. I built it after it. There's a difference, because pain is only a spark. What you do with it, that's your masterpiece. When the Phoenix Project went viral, women from every corner of the world started writing to me. Emails, letters, videos, stories of their own betrayals, rejections, dreams. One message said, "They told me I wasn't beautiful enough to be seen. But after hearing your story, I realized it's not about being seen. It's about being remembered." That line stayed with me. It reminded me why I started all this, not for validation, not for revenge, but for legacy. Soon, interviews flooded in, talk shows, documentaries. People wanted to hear how a girl once turned away from a yacht became one of the most powerful voices in business and empowerment. Every time they asked, "Was it revenge that motivated you?" I smiled and said, "No, it was dignity. Because revenge fades when the wound heals. But dignity, that never leaves you." One day, a major streaming platform reached out. They wanted to produce a documentary about my life, titled "The Woman Who Refused to Sink." I hesitated at first. I didn't want to reopen the past. But then I thought, maybe, just maybe, someone out there still needs to hear this. During filming, they took me back to every place that shaped me. The little tailor shop where I stitched my first gown, the cafe where I worked nights just to afford rent, and finally, the harbor, the same harbor where Daniel's family yacht used to dock. It was early morning when the crew arrived. The sky was soft pink, waves gentle. I stood there quietly, no makeup, no jewelry, just me. And as the camera rolled, I said, "Sometimes life will push you off the deck, and you'll think you're drowning. But it's only teaching you how to swim." That moment became the heart of the film. And when it was released, millions watched it, not because it was glamorous, but because it was real. A few months after the documentary's release, I attended a global entrepreneurship summit in Monaco. As I stepped into the grand ballroom, I felt a familiar presence. I turned, and there he was. Daniel, older now, more mature, but his eyes, still the same. He froze for a moment, as if the world had stopped turning. We didn't speak for a while. Then he walked up slowly and said, "Anna, you look incredible." I smiled, polite but distant. "Thank you." He nodded. "I watched the documentary. I didn't realize what you went through." "I'm sorry." There was sincerity in his voice, but it didn't pierce me anymore, because I had already healed. "I'm not angry anymore, Daniel," I said softly. "You taught me exactly what I needed to learn." He looked down. "I wish I'd believed in you back then." I gave him a gentle smile. "So do I, but if you had, I might never have become who I am." We both stood there in silence. No bitterness, just closure. Then I turned and walked away. Not to prove anything, but because I no longer needed to stay. Within a few years, Rel became one of the most recognizable fashion and lifestyle brands in the world. Our foundation had expanded into 14 countries. We trained over 10,000 women in business, design, and leadership. I was invited to give a TED Talk. The title, "They Told Me I Didn't Belong." So I built my own world. The audience stood and applauded. But the moment that moved me most wasn't the standing ovation. It was seeing a young girl in the front row, eyes shining, whispering to her mother, "One day, that'll be me." That's when I realized I had become what I once needed. A simple not of perfection, but of possibility. After the talk, I returned to my suite that night and read a letter. Not to Daniel, not to anyone else. To the girl I used to be. "Dear Anna, you did it. You survived every heartbreak, every rejection, every night you thought you weren't enough. But look at you now, unbroken, unbothered, unstoppable." They didn't believe in you because they couldn't see your fire. But you didn't need them, too, because your fire wasn't meant to keep them warm. It was meant to light your own way. I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal. It wasn't for the world to see. It was for me, a reminder that healing is the real success story. Years later, magazines wrote headlines like, Anna Laurent, the woman who turned rejection into revolution, the designer who redefined empowerment. But I don't see myself as a legend. I see myself as proof that heartbreak doesn't end your story, it starts a better one. Now, when I sail my yacht into the horizon, the wind feels softer. The ocean doesn't mock me anymore. It whispers, thank you for daring to rise, for daring to build, for daring to love yourself enough to never need validation again. So, if you're listening to this, if someone told you you're not enough, remember me. Remember that no one gets to decide your worth. Don't let rejection define your limits. Let it remind you of your power. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself. And when you do, when you finally stand where they said you never could, you'll smile. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you proved you were always right about you. That is how a broken heart becomes a legend. It had been almost 10 years since I last stood on that pier. The one where it all began. Where I had once been told, you don't belong here. Back then, those words had cut deep. Now, they felt like a ghost echo, soft and powerless against the tide of who I'd become. The air was cold that morning. Seagulls circled lazily over the quiet water, and the horizon glowed in soft gold. My yacht, Rel 2, swayed gently against the dock. I had named it not after my brand, but after the idea it was built upon. Rising from what breaks you. A small crew waited for me, but I told them I'd board alone. I wanted this moment to be mine. No cameras, no reporters, no applause. Just silence, just peace. As I stepped onto the deck, I ran my hand along the polished wood rail, smooth, warm in the sunlight. It felt surreal. There was a time when I couldn't even afford a ferry ticket, and now I owned what once symbolized my exclusion. But this wasn't about showing off. It was about closing the circle. I walked toward the edge and looked down into the calm water. My reflection stared back. A woman with quiet strength in her eyes, grace in her posture, peace in her heart. The same girl, but no longer the same soul. For a long time, I just stood there, letting the sound of the waves speak to me. They didn't roar like they used to. They whispered, and what they whispered was thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing, even when no one else did. Thank you for returning, not to prove, but to forgive. I could almost see them, Daniel's parents, their friends. That moment years ago when their laughter echoed across the deck as I stood humiliated on the pier. But now the memory didn't sting. It felt distant, faded, like an old film you've watched many times to still hurt. I smiled softly and whispered, I forgive you, because holding on to anger would mean I was still trapped in that moment, and I had moved far beyond it. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of remembering. Miss Laurent. I turned to see a young woman standing near the dock. She was maybe 22, clutching a sketchbook to her chest, eyes wide with nerves. I'm sorry to bother you, she said shyly. But you're the reason I started designing. I just graduated from art school, and I smiled, cutting her off gently. Come aboard. Her eyes widened. Really? Yes, I said. You belong here. She stepped onto the yacht, hands trembling slightly as she looked around, and I saw myself in her. That mix of fear and fire, hope and hesitation. I asked her, what's your dream? She hesitated, then said, to build something of my own. But I don't have the connections or the money. I nodded slowly. Neither did I, but I had one thing. I never stopped showing up, even when they laughed, even when I failed. She smiled faintly. How did you keep going? Because one day, I said, I decided I didn't need anyone's permission to succeed. Her eyes glistened, and in that moment, I knew this was the true purpose of my return, to pass the torch. Before we left the harbor, I took out a small folded note, the same letter I'd once written to my younger self, the one that had stayed with me through every milestone, every storm, every victory, I read it one last time, feeling every word like a heartbeat. They didn't believe in you because they couldn't see your fire. But your fire wasn't meant to keep them warm. It was meant to light your own way. Then, with a deep breath, I kissed the letter and let it fall into the water. It floated gently, then sank beneath the waves, disappearing, but never gone. I whispered, "Thank you, Anna, because that girl, the one who cried, who broke, who kept going, deserved gratitude. She was the reason I stood here now, unshakable, unafraid. As Relta pulled away from the dock, I stood beside the young designer, both of us watching the shore fade behind us. She turned to me and said, "You make it look so easy." I laughed softly. "It was never easy, but it was worth it." She nodded, her expression shifting from admiration to quiet determination. And I thought, yes, this is how legacies begin. Not with fame, or wealth, or power, but with a single spark passed from one soul to another. The sun climbed higher, lighting the sea in gold. Wind in my hair. I closed my eyes and whispered to the horizon, "I came here once to prove I was enough. Now I return to remind others they always were." Because, in the end, revenge was never the real victory. The real victory was transformation. The girl who once stood trembling at the edge of someone else's world now commanded her own. And she did it not through hate, but through grace, resilience, and self-belief. So I smiled at the waves and said, "You were right, life. You didn't break me, you built me." Then I turned to the open sea, to endless blue, endless freedom, and whispered the final line of my story. "This time, I'm not just on the yacht. This time, I own the ocean."